In this section, let's start talking about configuring BGP on multiple networking devices. So just like in the switch port exercise, we're going to basically start from a not much and try to set up a configuration and ultimately do some validation on that configuration. Now, I'm going to start using our switch ports directory that already contains the group vars information for Arista, and it already contains a playbook and the configs and diffs directory from the previous exercises that we did. Now, we have several routers, networking devices in the lab environment. So let's go ahead and log in to the Cisco One router. Let's look at its current BGP config. So it does have BGP configured. It has a router ID set. It's peering with 88.38, which is actually an iOS XR device. And that is actually in the established state. There are no prefixes being sent, but it is actually up from a BGP perspective. And we see that our autonomous system number is 42, and our IP is going to be this 88.20. Now if we log into one of the Arista switches, go ahead and look at its configuration. So nothing configured for BGP. Now, first thing, I'm actually going to mock up the configuration that we're ultimately going to deploy from our Ansible system. So the config that we're going to want, basically you need to make sure your syntax is right on your commands. So somehow you're going to have to work out that what you have is exactly the syntax you need to have. So we'll say in this case that we're going to be doing eBGP. Our neighbor device is going to be at 10.220.88.20. He is remote AS 42. Go look and see if our BGP session comes up. While that's trying to get established, I'm going to go ahead and log in with a second window. Okay, we'll see if this came up into the established state. It hasn't come up into established state yet. We'll give it a little bit longer. I'll go ahead and log in here. Oops, wrong address to use there. Obviously, I also need to configure this side, so it's not ever going to come up unless I configure this side as well. So I'll go ahead and configure this side. So that is 10.220.88. Remote AS is 18. See if we get into the established state. Okay, it just came up. Just came up on this side. So we have a working BGP session. We're not sending any routes. So let's go ahead and add a couple of routes to send just to make it be a little bit more interesting. So we'll say IP route 1.1 .50.1. We'll just make this be /24. I'll just route that to null 0. I'll send a second one. I'll route to null 0. I'll go back into my BGP. We'll say we're going to announce 51.0, the mask 255.255.255.0. Do the same thing with 50. Go over here, see if we're getting those prefixes. Okay, we'll look at our config. Okay, so we're getting 2 prefixes, and let's send one the other way. So we'll do IP route 2.2.2.0. /24 null 0 router BGP 18. Announce that route. We'll look at the BGP config. Okay, so that's what our BGP config looks like on the Arista side. We'll look at the BGP config on this side. Okay, and let's look at our... So now we're getting a route from 88.32. If we do show IP BGP, we can see we're learning this route remotely. Do show IP BGP. We can see we're learning these 2 routes remotely. Okay, so we have our BGP peering session set up, and that's all great basic, basic network engineering stuff. But now we don't obviously want to have this all be pushed manually. This was just for us to get exactly what we needed from a config perspective. So let's go ahead and copy these items. Take these out of here. We'll make a new template, this bgp.j2. We'll just literally at this point go ahead and copy what we have in that current config. And we'll think about here in a second how we handle the differences between what's in Cisco and what's in Arista. So we have these elements here. And let me get the static routes as well. And initially, I'm actually just going to make 2 templates. And I'll call the first one bgp.eos, and I'll call the second one, I'll remove that. I'll go ahead and modify the BGP EOS. Get rid of these lines. I'll actually make it look a little bit more to how we'd expect it in a config file. Okay. All right, now we're not going to do anything with the configuration. Yeah, we can configure. Let's go ahead and drop the iOS XR just like we're configuring a new peer. So the other items already exist, but here are the items we're going to add in the case of the Cisco One router. So now we have our 2 templates. So we have the templates. They're all hard-coded. We haven't converted anything to a variable format yet. But let's go ahead and get our playbook working. So I say test bgp.yaml. This is starting with what we had in the switch port example, so I just copied that over. Now I'm going to basically go ahead and reconstruct what we need in this case. So I'm actually going to go from 9 to the end of the file, comment everything out. Now let's see if we can make it work, the templating part of this, just using, first we'll start with Arista, and let's say we're going to configure it on Arista 5. This is our connectivity test. Now here we're going to start our templating section. So I'll go ahead and comment these out, or uncomment these, excuse me. This is going to be the BGP config. Now this is going to be, the source template is going to be BGP hyphen a second variable. The second variable is going to be this platform variable, which we're going to get from group vars. The same platform that we use with Napalm. So EOS and iOS. And that's why I chose those extensions, because I knew I had a variable that differentiated between EOS and iOS, this platform variable. So now we're going to have BGP hyphen platform.j2. Our destination is going to be inventory hostname, and for now I'm just going to make this be sequence number 3, bgp.text. I still have my tags gen template. Now in my configs directory, I need to make dir configs PyNet switch 5, because previously we were configuring PyNet 6, but here we're going to configure PyNet switch 5. Okay, so now let's see if we can execute this and generate our template for Arista. So we go ahead and generate our template for Arista. So it didn't like that. Let's look at what my issue is. It looks like I didn't finish my quote. So here I needed to finish my quoting to indicate that this is all going to be a string with Jinja 2 embedded inside of it. Okay, so we got another error. So let's see. The error was BGP is undefined. Okay, so let's look here. So my source template, so I see what I did there, that I indicated this was a variable. It's not a variable, it's a string literal there. This part is a variable. So that's a variable, and then we're going to go configs, inventory host name, and then this is just string literals. Let's try again. Okay, so now we look at our configs. We have this. We're generating that, and that should be identical. Oh, I see an error in my template. Let me update my template. The error that I saw was I don't want the default route to be in there. I only want the changes in this example that we're going to be making, which is these changes here. So I removed the default route. Regenerate my templates. Relook at that file. And we're just basically getting a copy of that file, because at this point we don't have any variables embedded in our template. Now let's repeat this process, but in this case we'll repeat it for iOS. So I'm going to go ahead and add here PyNet router 1. So we're going to run it on PyNet switch 5 and PyNet router 1. I'm going to get rid of that because we're configuring BGP. So we'll test connectivity with Napalm. We'll generate the BGP config. So we need to do a few glue things here. So we need to make dir configs PyNet router 1 because that directory does not exist. We need to go into group vars and we need to make dir Cisco, and then we cd into Cisco, and then let's look what we need from Arista. So right now we don't need the VLANs, but we do need our providers. So I'm going to copy those over from a previous week. So let's go get our Cisco providers. We can probably get those from like class 7, exercises, group vars. We'll copy those in to here. I'm going to just move this to make the naming more consistent and clearer. Let's look at what's in this directory. So we have Napalm credentials here. We have Ansible core module credentials here. We have our platform, which is iOS here. Go back into our playbook, and we'll go ahead and execute our playbook. See if we can generate the output for the iOS device. Forgot my tags statement. Okay, so we see the Arista config was unchanged. We are generating the router config. Let's look at the router config. We see that we're generating basically an exact copy of what we have in our template. Now the next step in the process is we're going to want to start converting the things that change into variables and start putting them into our inventory system so that we're not generating this information just from a static template, but that we're variabilizing things, decoupling the things that are in our template, in our playbook, and moving those into inventory.